Hello, and welcome to another edition of the SEANC View Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Owens, along with Artis Watkins, Suzanne Beasley, and Samantha Klein. Today is opening day at the legislature for the short session. It's Tuesday, April 21st. So we're here today with House Speaker Destin Hall, and he has been gracious enough to give us a few minutes in his conference room to talk about the session and what he expects and what we'll be looking for. And I know your time is limited, so let's just jump right in. And Artis, you want to start off?
Sure. Speaker Hall. First of all, I'm with John. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know to be one of the craziest days of the year for anybody down here, much less the speaker.
Glad to do it. I think my first time on y'all's podcast.
It is.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll be on many more times.
Amen. Glad to do it.
But today, being that it's the first day of session, is a really great time because we need to talk to you about this budget. We need to talk to you about the concerns we're hearing from state employees and retirees. But first, we want to talk to you about public services, like the shrinking nature of public services. We talk about this a lot these days, that looking at the General Assembly's website under fiscal research, it shocked me that since 2009, the number of state employees has not grown. I mean, we have the same number of people, more or less, right now less, serving 2 million more people than they were serving in 2009. And that's not good. There's a lot more roads, prisons, schools, everything. And I'm wondering, how does the House look at that gap, and is closing it something you see as a priority?
Well, I think the first thing we look at on the House side, and one of the reasons we don't have a budget right now, is taking care of the employees that we do have. And I know we'll talk more about that in the podcast today. But, in terms of, how many employees we have and the services that are offered, it's an ever-changing issue. Of course, as time goes on, technology changes things. There are things that make things, a bit more efficient now, and you don't need as many employees because of computerization. AI is coming. Allegedly, none of us are ever going to have jobs again once it gets up and running, is what they say. I doubt it works out that way. But it's something we have to constantly watch. Top of mind is the state trooper issue. If you look at the number of troopers we have in the state compared to the population growth, we're way behind on that issue. And obviously, one of their big jobs is public safety on the roads. The roads are more busy these days. A lot of people may say, no, we don't want more state troopers. We don't need, because they don't get pulled over.
Yeah.
But, the fact is there are spots in state government where we probably do need to add to the number of employees. But times constantly change. Healthcare is a big thing right now. The entire country has an aging population. Because of that, there's going to be more and more stress on the healthcare system, and state obviously plays a major role in that. But even within that, within DHHS, we're dealing with a Medicaid issue right now where the costs have gone through the roof. I mean, $1 billion cost overruns. And all of those things make it more difficult to pay our state employees what they're worth. If we're spending $1 billion over what we should be on Medicaid payments, that's money that we could be paying our current state employees, that we could be attracting new ones as well. So we got to be dynamic with it. It's got to be a data-driven operation. It's a useful comparison to see how many employees we used to have versus what we have now in our population. But of course, that doesn't tell us the whole story, because we want to get to the areas where the need is, where we don't have enough in whatever given agency that really makes the most difference in people's lives. And you all do a good job with helping us with that and, hearing from folks on the ground. And I also find that, from time to time, I hear from various state employees in my district or elsewhere who say, hey, here's how things have changed over the years, and, we need some help with whatever the case may be. That kind of stuff, it really is helpful, because it's impossible to just go in and look statewide and say, well, we're going to increase the number of state employees by 10% or whatever the case may be. But what we need to do is have a targeted approach in those areas where the greatest demand is currently at, and increase there. So I'm sure y'all can tell me where those places are too. And the House
we have
will work
some ideas.
Yeah.
We do. We'll leave a list. So moving right along and being timely here, the budget is obviously the big issue right now. I know session is crazy in any time, but the short session is really hectic. Just seeing today move the way it has. We know that, and know that putting the budget together is not easy. State employees know they didn't get anything last year. They know there wasn't a budget last year, and so they're looking for what's coming this year. What can you share about state employee pay raises?
Well, I can tell you that on the House side, we're still fighting to get greater increases in pay to all state employees. I am optimistic that we're going to get a budget done in this short session. I have every reason to think that that's the case. We've started that discussion with the Senate during this short session and really started it before we got into short session. And some progress has been made. And I think every member on both sides of this building understand that we really have to pass a budget. And, a lot of the breakdown and not getting one last year, really for a number of reasons. In 2023, we passed the state's largest budget we've ever had. There was a bunch of federal dollars involved. That was late in the year in 23. So we came in 24, less pressure then to do the budget update we typically do in the short session because we had just passed the biggest budget the state had ever had.
Right.
Then we get into 25 and then, inflation was still going on. We'd been through a period of time of really great inflation, very high all across the country and especially and also here in North Carolina. And so, of course, we have a tax policy right now that's based upon the state hitting certain revenue thresholds. Those numbers are static, meaning they're not indexed at all. So $1 in 2023 is really not worth the same today that it was back then. So we recognize that. And on the House side, we've tried to look, we want to continue to cut taxes, which we think is good for everybody. State employees get a tax cut too. But on the House side, we want to do that in a responsible way, which is really following the policy on tax cuts that we've done for 15 years, which is a slow, gradual decline. The state's population, its growth in both in people and in business, it helps make up for the reduction in the tax rate in terms of state revenue. So that's been a critical component of it. But frankly, among the big issues that have been in dispute, there's no question that state employee salary has been right there at the top of those lists. And from our vantage point on the House side, we obviously want to have greater raises. Just speaking from my own experience, I'm a small business owner. I have a law firm at home. We've got many employees, and I've seen over the course of the last several years, what you paid people in the past, you no longer can do that. You've got to give folks pay raises because their cost of living's going up, just like it has for everybody. And so, we on the House side, our budget approach has been just that, both on the tax triggers, acknowledging the inflationary issues, but also to make sure that the state has the revenue to help with those salary increases while also acknowledging the impacts of inflation on state employees. And so it's something we're standing firm on. It's, in my mind, it doesn't do us much good to just pass a budget to say we passed a budget. The key is what's in the budget. And for us on the House side, that means, passing something with meaningful raises in it that accounts for the reality that all of us have faced, with the inflationary pressures that we've seen nationally.
Yeah. And we appreciate that work. And another group that often feels like they're just forgotten, and sometimes they just kind of are retirees. They haven't had a true COLA since 2017. That was a 1% recurring COLA. And every other year there's been some type of bonus. Is there any discussion of what there might be in the budget for retirees?
Yeah, so I'm confident that there will at least be a bonus for them. And I think that sometime very soon, we're going to need to do the true COLA increase because, again, if you just compare inflation to the COLA increases that we've seen, again, 1%, I think, in 2017, and it's time to get one passed. And I think there's a lot of support for that among members of it, really on both sides of the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm.
The key is, getting to a budget deal and getting an actual broad scope deal done. But there's no question that we're going to have to do something on COLA, and we need to do it very soon because you can't just go forever and not do those things. And with inflation being what it has been, the one-time bonuses that they get largely are eaten up by those inflationary pressures.
Yeah, very quickly. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, and I was really, to piggyback on Suzanne saying, hey, thanks for recognizing some of this stuff. It's a lot of times, just like in real life and politics, people say it's not what you say, it's what you do. But honestly, over here with someone in your position, what you say really does matter so much more than for most people because people are listening to you. And that's going to carry weight. It's going to drive the conversation. It's going to move policy. And so I saw you recently on WRAL did an extended interview, and we were all incredibly pleased. Number one, to be really frank, you're the first politician I've seen in years maybe ever, who in talking about all the public employees, all of whom matter, instead of saying, the teachers and state employees every time, you mixed it up. Sometimes you said the state employees and the teachers, because none of us can argue with the fact of the importance of teachers. Most of us are parents. I know, Sammy, I know we're not pushing you yet, but most of us are parents. And so the teachers of our children are about as important as many people we could think of. But there's so many public servants that feel like they get just lost in the shuffle, and people who work in the public schools who feel like if their title is a teacher, they get lost. So it meant a lot to people, and I know that may seem kind of silly to say, but it really was an important moment in many ways.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and and I do feel that way. The fact is, as you say, everyone agrees teacher pay is important, and we obviously think it is on the House side. We're proposing relatively high raises for them, but state employees, they're also part of the state's employment ecosystem, and in many ways, this body sort of is the employer in some sense. We're sort of setting those pay rates, and you can't think about one set of employees and not the others. The fact is everybody's hit by that inflation, whether you're a teacher or state trooper. I think about the correctional facility officers who, we've done some over the years have tried to increase, but those are tough jobs, and the pay's not enough for what they have to do, and we've got a lot more to do on those things. And everybody is for public safety, and especially folks in my party, we're completely for public safety. And if you're going to be for public safety, unfortunately, you got to have prisons for some folks.
Yeah.
But if you don't have people to work there, it just doesn't work. And so there are many areas like that are the state employees, outside of the education system, where we've got a lot of work to do. State troopers, again, I mentioned those earlier. I mean, the kind of folks who put their life on the line, to do these jobs. And that's just the couple of examples that people think about a lot. But I know there are others throughout the system. And candidly, at least my take on why you always hear the whole, teachers and state employees comment, it's easier to raise the teacher rate because there's fewer of them than the rest of the state employees. If you're looking at the budget math, a 2% raise for state employees is a bunch of money. And, the equivalent may be 5 or 6% for teachers, depending on what you're doing. And I think, in the past around this building, it's just been easier to say teacher raises. It doesn't cost the state as much money, even though it's a larger increase. But we can't just simply let the rest of the state employees go. And that's why on our side, our proposed raise was greater than the governor's. And I don't know if that's happened since I've been here, although he's got a new set of raises, I heard. I mean, I guess you can just keep saying higher and higher numbers. But it just reflects, my caucus and my own beliefs that we, as the state employer, we have to recognize if you want good folks to work these jobs, you've just got to pay them. That's just the reality. Any business owner who operates these days understands that as well, and we should operate the same way. And the last thing I'll say in that long, extended answer is that the state has the money to do these things. And that's one of the reasons we've had this tax policy fight between the House and the Senate. We both want to reduce income taxes on folks. Neither side is going to increase those, but it's the difference in the pace at which we reduce those. For 15 years, we've had a general gradual pace of reductions, and the Senate wants to go much further. And the problem with that is, if you do that too quickly, then we wouldn't have the money to be able to give.
You'll have a whole lot more DMV situations.
Yeah.
Where the public is up in arms and doesn't understand what's wrong with their government.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it sounds, we all want our taxes lower, of course, but we also want our services efficiently. And if we want to open a small business, we don't want there not to be enough people at the Secretary of State's office like Secretary Marshall was telling the committee. So y'all have a tough job. I don't think anybody has any question about that. I will say one thing that does affect the state employees and the teachers is the state health plan. And as long as we've been doing this, and I'm looking at Suzanne, the state health plan has been a question because it costs a lot of money to have a health plan for that many people. And one of the things over the years that was kind of a fallacy that was thrown around was that somehow the users of the health plan were either more negligent, went to the ER for a headache, or just were frivolous with their use of health care. And the data that we most recently saw at the Board of Trustees of the health plan shows actually it's the opposite. The utilization's going down. It's going the right way, but the prices keep going up. And North Carolina being number one costliest place for healthcare in the country, that's not surprising. But you've got the health plan in front of you now as part of the budget. Last year, employees and retirees had to pay who are in the health plan, who were not Medicare eligible yet. Their prices went up, but they didn't get a raise. Their premiums, rather. So how do you look at the health plan this year? I mean, what we've always wanted is transparency. If we could see what we're paying at these public contracts, we feel like that would fix it right there, because some of the vendors are definitely charging the state too much. No question. I think the Treasurer's Office is doing an amazing job of trying to use the power of the market to drive that down in terms of cost for y'all, figuring out budget issues. What are you looking at this year with the health plan? Do you think that's going to be a big hurdle?
Yeah, so I think in the past we've had to supplement and send money to it from this body, and there's a number of reasons for that. Again, inflationary pressures, the cost of healthcare continues to go up everywhere, but especially here in North Carolina. And so it is something we watch pretty closely. And I know it's a separate issue from the Medicaid issue, but one similarity is that we see in Medicaid, certain providers and the way they bill, and you may see a spike in the data. And we think probably the same thing going on with some of the providers that are within the state health plan. And not to say all those folks are doing anything improper. And I would imagine the pool of people in state health plan probably have a lower utilization rate for healthcare than the rest of the population. But anything we can do to promote doing away with waste, fraud, and abuse, if it's a provider who's billing unnecessary things. But fundamentally, it goes back to an issue of the cost of healthcare going up so much. And we're not going to fix that through the state health plan. We can help with that because they've got the market share to be able to negotiate a lot better contracts with various entities. But more things we can do in the healthcare space to lower the cost in this state. And I know a number of our members are working on those things. But as to the premium increase, first, everybody, I think, understands still a great deal. I mean, what state employees pay for our health plan relative to most folks in the private sector. But my hope is in this budget that we pass a budget in the short session, which I think we will. Number one, looking at how we can do some of those things retroactively as to pay and or some sort of bonus that takes into account the increase that they've had in their premiums.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
because if you compare it to the private sector, it doesn't look like a bad deal. But you don't get the wages of the private sector. So
exactly. Yeah.
Y'all got something to wrestle with there. I think that's probably one of your tougher.
Yeah. And I do want to point out too, while we're here, a lot of people think that it would be a great idea if legislators had to use the same state health plan that they do. And so we try to make that clear that you do, so that you do actually have a vested interest in it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the members of this building use it. And so, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. It's great compared to the private world, but in the private world, as you say, people will typically make more money. But what I hope that we can do in this budget is to do something about at least trying to hold folks harmless for some of the premium increases and not just doing a prospective pay increase, because at least I recognize that we've got a gap in time now where those increases were not implemented. And so the salary increases, that is. Whether that's a bonus to try to make up for some of that or whether it's a retroactive pay increase, the hope is that, at least that much will help them deal with some of these healthcare costs. And long term, I like the work our state treasurer is doing. I think he understands, these large, complex operations. His background is in, the financial world. And I think if anybody can work and use all the tools we have now to lower costs for the state health plan, I think it's him. And I know he's working towards that, and we've partnered with him to do all we can. But if anybody figures out how to lower healthcare costs in this country, then I want to talk to them. But long term, it's something we got to get our arms around. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, so there's real concern among state employees that State Auditor Dave Bullock's lapsed salary report will be used to justify job cuts. In the House budget, you did call for cuts when you put out a budget and the Senate put out a budget last year, but you couldn't get a compromise. What's the House's approach to these concerns? Because we were just talking about the public still needs these services. And cutting, it's kind of like the personal income tax. Yes, it sounds good to cut, but what's the impact? So if you cut some jobs that might put money on paper, but are you concerned about an impact on the public?
Yeah, sure. Always, anytime that, you're making cuts to state government, we have that concern. I think many of the jobs that we had, that is the open jobs or the lapsed salaries we had cut in our budget were those that had been vacant for 5 years or somewhere thereabout. And I also recognize, the counter to that is just, well, they don't pay enough, so you can't get anybody to come into them. And I think our thought process has been that, first sort of get our current employees where they need to be. And part of that may be using some cost savings from lapsed salaries, getting them up to the right rates, while at the same time continuing to work with the auditor and others in state government to see where are the critical points where we really need to add folks. DMV was obviously one of those. We've done some of those things. It's been improved quite a bit. I've talked about the Highway Patrol here today, the correctional officer staff. Those are some things that we know we need to increase. But you get into other areas, getting back to the healthcare space, DHHS, and this labyrinth that they have over there, and dealing with Medicaid. And then it becomes a question of, is it a matter of giving more employees to them, or are we just making a bad problem worse? Or is it a matter that we need to get their cost under control? So it's not a one size fits all, I guess, is what I would say to it. I don't look at it personally as if a job's been vacant for forever, it just means they don't need it. But the way we looked at it in the short run was, if they've been without it that long, maybe we could take those funds, give it to the current employees as pay increases, and continue to assess where we need to add employees. The key is, though, as this building's apt to do, don't take the lapsed salary money and spend it somewhere else and, give a pay raise otherwise. The goal is that money that's sitting on the sideline, give it to those employees who we have, because, if they're weathering the storm, keep them there. They're obviously good folks, and we don't want to lose the good people that we do have. We've been in such an inflationary environment that it's every year. I mean, it's such a huge increase that, the raises, in my opinion, that we need to do, I mean, frankly, I'd like to do more than what our budget had in it. But, I'm one of 170 people, and so I put in there what I think we can get done right now. I hope we can actually do a little bit more than that now. Some times past hits our budget. But yeah, I think you got to look at it as smart cuts, not just the chainsaw and go in and cut out every single lapsed salary. And I know it's something, frankly, y'all can help us with as well, where you see those needs within state government. But there's so many tools now with AI, technology, and data that we can look at to figure out which of those. There's certainly some of those jobs that are lapsed that are not necessary. Times have changed, the technology's changed, but some of them, they probably are necessary, but the pay on it is so low that, nobody who could do that job is going to go take half the money, when they go to the private sector.
Or the agencies. I mean, what we're hearing is, in candor from agency heads, is that we haven't been funded enough as an agency. Our budgets haven't changed with the times. And so we're literally paying the light bill. One agency head said, look, to comport with federal law, this was juvenile justice, so they're in charge of the lives of youth offenders. And so they have to keep it staffed. So they've been hiring temporary staff, which costs so much more than just hiring people. So a lot of these decisions at the end of the day get a little frustrating, because the last time we saw a number on the cost of turnover was the Purdue administration. And at that time, it was over $400 million a year was the cost of turnover. Vacancy rates then were a fraction of what they are now. So the frustration we sometimes bring to the table is, we're paying for this. You could either pay for people and give services to folks, or you can pay for the lack of people, which means you're in a constant cycle of interviewing and training and watching them walk out.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of the challenge that we wanted to point out to the members, and we'll try to keep doing that. But we would love to know, what are your thoughts on that, on something like a turnover cost? Is that something we should be factoring in?
Well, it certainly should. And I know I've seen and heard some reports of the length of time that it takes some agencies when they go to hire somebody, and how long it takes them to get up and running. And again, that's one of the reasons why My take on it is the good folks that we have there currently, don't lose them, because they're the folks who are helping train new ones who come in. And you're right, it costs money to deal with vacancies. It's a time issue. You've got to learn how to do the job. It's just like anything else. I mean, you've got folks who have been there a long time and they're experienced and they can create smooth transitions for folks who are coming in. But some of these agencies, it may be a year before the person's really up and running. And so, and that's where it becomes a complicated analysis, in the sense that I don't think you can apply that equally across every single agency. Every agency is different. They have a different level of issue that they're dealing with. I mean, again, DHHS, there's thousands of different issues that their employees are dealing with in different positions. And if you sort of break it down to, I think, the subsets, like if you just looked at state troopers, for example, you can do that analysis and say, well, how are we losing people and how much is that costing us? But there's no question that the vacancy issue costing more money is something that I don't know that this body looks at enough, quite frankly. But I think it's a symptom of our initial problem being most of us feeling like our current employees are not making enough money, and trying to fix that issue before we can get our arms around, the next step of these vacancies and how do we get more.
Well, amen to that.
Yeah.
You're saying a lot of things in your tenure so far, 1 year and some months into it, that are honestly pretty exciting for us, that are different. We had a great relationship with Speaker Moore, but it's always different when somebody new comes in. But honestly, you're also a new generation of speaker.
Yeah.
And I think that matters. We usually have a Gen Z moment on our podcast. We're not doing that this week because we have an important guest, but we're trying to talk a lot at SEANC about how a new generation looks at government. And so I can't think of anybody better to tell us what are your thoughts about how we can get people more interested, the next generations interested in public service, and how can it be meaningful for them?
Well, so I'm of the millennial generation, of course, and it's an interesting take. I mean, I've had my own experiences, practicing law, and I started in Charlotte and I came back home and worked there. And, there's certainly a different mindset of folks my age than there might be of the generation ahead of me and the folks behind me, and I guess which is Z or what, I get them all mixed up, but they're a lot different as well. And so just like every other employer, and again, I employ folks of multiple of those generations, and you notice that they value different things. I find that especially younger folks value having flexibility in their time. And again, they grew up with technology, and so they don't think it's as critical to have an in-person meeting once a week in the office, and it's email works, and they have Microsoft Teams now. And so as an employer, the state's got to sort of be flexible as well to get these folks to come do those jobs. And it's, whatever generation you're in, first thing you want to know is, what are you going to pay me?
That's right.
You can deal with a lot of ills if you get paid enough. But outside of that, and I find folks in my generation, the one behind it, they certainly care about pay, but they seem to care less in some ways than older generations did. And maybe it's just a function of they're just less willing to put up with certain things. If they have to come to the office every single day, no matter what, and do these once a week meetings, they don't want to do it. But I think we would be wise to remember that and giving flexibility to state employees, because there's many reasons to come to work for the state. I mean, you still have a great retirement system, the health plan. All of those things are solid. As we've talked about, all need improving. That's always going to be the case. But they're solid jobs that people can rely upon. And we need to recognize, though, the sort of the different sensibilities of folks in different generations. And I've got them both in this office and in my one at home. And, you sort of just learn the different, I guess, preferences of some of those folks.
Go with the flow.
Yeah, that's right. And you kind of have to do that, or else you're not going to have many of those younger folks these days. I've got some here. I can't get rid of them. They show up from time to time, but I'm working on it. But no, it really is an interesting thing. But from the state standpoint, it goes back to you got to look at these things with through the lens of reality. Mm-hmm. They got to be paid enough, yes, but it's also sort of recognizing the changes that a lot of private businesses have already done. And the reason they do these things and let people work from home some, and I'm not suggesting at all to the listeners that we're going to just make all the state employees let them work from home all the time. Anyway, I don't need 1,000 emails.
Nobody go crazy listening.
But, some level of flexibility like the private sector, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, we are we're just so thrilled to get to talk to you about these things and hear where you're coming from. I think that we've put you through the paces.
Yeah.
We haven't held back a bit.
Yeah.
And
And
as
a
usual,
little plug, on May 6th, we're having a lobby day.
Okay.
First one SEANC's had in a very long time, and I think we're going to have a good turnout. So
Good.
there will be people to come over and talk to the members of the House, and they'll stop by your office too.
Good.
So
Well, appreciate you guys coming by, and it's easy for me to talk to you because a House side's pretty good on your issues mostly, but I also I feel an obligation to really get some of these things done, and I know we've worked on them for a long time, and I think that for a number of reasons, I do think we're to a point of finally making some real progress on these issues, and I hope to see that in this budget this year.
great.
So really quickly, I know we're pressed for time, but contrary to my intro, I did do a little research on you. Every week, I ask a random question for people. And so I did see on your Instagram a post about a little baby, and that baby's about to turn a year old, right?
Just last week, turned 1 year old.
Okay.
Last Wednesday.
So my question is, what have you learned in your first year as a dad?
Well, he's taught me a lot more than I've been able to teach him thus far about life. It's our first child and the best thing I've been a part of. One reason we'll have a short session this year is because I would rather go spend time with him than I would all these politicians here.
Yeah.
But it's been great. It's, people say all the time it changes your perspective on life, and you really don't understand it until you go through it, but it really does. I think it improves your ability to sort of know what matters and what does in life. And he's been great. He's one. He's just about to walk.
Oh.
He's wide open. He can hold the chair, the table. He can walk. And he's trying to, walk without holding anything. And it's any day now. He's going to do it.
Oh,
So
y'all better be ready.
it's a blast. That's what I hear. But I'm ready for it. I enjoy it. Every month, it's like, they make another sort of progress.
Yeah.
But it's great. Really enjoy it.
soak
Well,
it up.
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, like Artis said, for having us here, and just enjoy the rest of your week, state employees.